Hey guys, and welcome to a video about item filters in the Ruthless, especially in the Ruthless solo self-found mode here for Crucible League, but this video will be basically also valid for any other league, because we will look at how to create a item filter for the Ruthless mode. And as you might know, the Ruthless mode is quite special because item scarcity is really crazy, so you do not find a lot of loot in general. And sometimes you just want to highlight specific items like bases. For example, I'm currently highlighting all kinds of Marrakech bows because I might switch and try to play this crazy totem stuff that currently is part of the meta. I'm not really sure if I really will, but I'm just collecting bows and putting some crucible trees on them, and therefore I have specifically edited the item filter of NeverSync. So if you do not know NeverSync, there is a website called FilterBlade XYZ, I think it is. And the guy that originally made the site is still very active. I still think he's like the main admin of the site, and he made a Ruthless filter that is very generic, and you can easily edit it yourself to your likings. And this is what I did. So for example, if any Marrakech bow drops, it doesn't matter if it's rare, magic or normal, you will hear and see the following. Boing. And the same goes for any bone helmets, because I might play a summoner, so I wanted to definitely do not miss or not want to miss any bone helmets. Same goes for bone rings. And another thing that is kind of a bit highlighted, but not with a sound and with this kind of light and also like nothing on the minimap, is sundering axis, because I might play a melee build next. So I might craft these and just put like a fossil on them or like an essence, whatever. So yeah, and what we are going to look now, or what we are going to do together now, is basically setting up the generic Ruthless item filter from NeverSync to our own liking. So I will just start with the examples that I have made here. For example, highlighting these bows and so on. And you can obviously either use the NeverSync filter as it is. You could also use my filter. I will try to link it in the video description. I'm not sure if that's possible, but I think so, because it's public. And obviously you can also make your own filter and put in your own items that you might want like to put into the Crucible tree, to see if there is maybe a unique version or maybe an interesting tree like on these bows and so on. Alright, so let's jump straight into it. So over here we are at the site that I've mentioned. This is the FilterBlade XYZ page or website. And over here we can already see I have a Crucible Ruthless solo self-found filter that I've been using for basically the past 2 weeks. I made not so many changes. This is basically the changes to from the normal game that NeverSync already made. And as you can see, it's based on the NeverSync Ruthless soft normal filter that he has set up. But we are not going to use my filter because it is already done. We are going to create a new filter, and when you basically come to this FilterBlade site, you will see this overview here, and then you will see different versions of NeverSync filter that you could use. You could use one for softcore, you could use one for hardcore. This is I'm not sure what this is basically. I've never used this one, to be honest. And usually you can adjust them with this slider here. So really depends on how far your character already is, because for example for solo self-found, so not Ruthless but normal solo self-found, I was using a very strict filter that only highlights like the best items. So any bad uniques that you would not even pick up are not even shown in the filter. But as you might know, in Ruthless you cannot hide items, so even like white items that you are not interested in will still be on the screen. This is what NeverSync made in this specific Ruthless filter, and we can just click it here. and then it is basically active, and these items are very small, so you would not really even see them on the screen. They're just made very small, but maybe one day they will add the functionality to hide items, which would be nice, because sometimes in the game you just click on an item by accident, and instead of moving you'll be standing still, and that can lead to some deaths, which is especially bad for hardcore in my opinion. So yeah, they might change that in the future. But for now, we will just choose this Never Sync Ruthless filter, and then we can go to the customize section here. And what I did is I just went from the very top until the very bottom and changed only the things that I thought are worth changing or that I maybe disliked in the Never Sync version. And one of them, for example, is so let's just start together at the very beginning. One of them, for example, is the size of the chromatic orb items. So as you might know, like items with red, green and blue sockets that are linked will sell for a chromatic orb, and I can only recommend to pick those up. But you really want to kind of prioritize, because very large items like big two-hand axes or bows obviously clutter your inventory very quickly. So in this case, I just made them a bit smaller with this slider here. As you can see, the size of the item represents the size of the drop later in game basically, and as the smaller it is, the smaller it will be in game. So I made the large items very small, I made the medium size items considerably smaller too, and I left I actually just decreased it a bit, because it can be quite distracting if you are in like a fight with, let's say, a few rares, and it can get quite dangerous. You do not want to accidentally click on one of these chromatic items and pick them up and stand still and potentially die to ground effects or whatever kind of shotgun effects are hitting you in that moment. So I prefer to decrease the size of these highlights a bit. So I think the rest I kind of basically left. What you could do, for example, because jeweler orbs are so rare in the Ruthless mode, you do not really want to miss any of the 6 socket items. And when you click onto the jeweler orb section here and click onto sound, this is basically what you will hear when one of these items drops in game. Then you could basically adjust the sound as well. Oh, sorry, this one here. So this is basically the beam that you will see on the minimap. This is the icon that you will see on the minimap, and this is the sound that you will hear when the item drops. And you can also adjust the volume here. You can just hear it in the background. If I pull that down, it's a bit more silent. And in this case, I went for, I think, a bit more bright sound, because sometimes, or like oftentimes, I'm listening to music when I'm playing, and I really want to hear that stuff dropping. So I went for this sound, which is really, yeah, you cannot miss that. It's gonna be quite loud and really obvious. Obviously, those things do not drop that often, so you don't need to worry that you will be hearing that all day. It would be nice, but you usually only hear them every once in a while. So yeah, I adjusted the sound on that one, and also this one, for example. And you can just go through here and check the different sounds. This one is quite noticeable as well. That's a bit under the radar. Yeah, that's like, I like these bright and really flashy sounds, so I went for those. And again here, so that section is basically done. Glassblower's bubble is any kind of flasks that you find. So here I did basically the same thing that I did with the chromatics. I just decreased the size slightly, so I won't accidentally click onto any flasks that are dropping, because I do not like that so much. Besides that, I left the vendor recipes untouched, just adjusted these changes. And then we come to another section that is really interesting, and that is basically chancing bases. And with chancing bases, I mean specifically things like, for example, this X here. So just white items that are an interesting base for you, that you could basically put an alchemy orb on, or maybe a fossil or an essence, in order to maybe chance them, so to say, to get a good weapon for, let's say, Bone Shatter or whatever. Right, so you can go to the section chancing bases. You will already have something in here. So in this case, we have Gladiator Blades and Champion Kite Shields. I think this is kind of an outdated thing. I'm not sure. The Gladiator base, I think it was a Combs Heart back in the day. I'm not sure if this is kind of still the same, but it's not really relevant nowadays. So I kind of deleted that. And in this case, for example, I entered a Sundering Axe, so you can just put that in here, and you can add a Sundering Axe, and then you can say, okay, I want it to be size 38. Then you can have like a change of the text, so you could make it a bit more obvious when it drops. So something like this. You can also choose like a background. I mean, this doesn't really look so good. So, but for example, I always put like a blue frame on the item and the red text, but I make it a bit smaller so it doesn't distract me. And in this case, I also didn't include a sound because they can drop quite often, so I do not want to hear it all the time. But like this, I won't miss it in game. It is really obvious when it drops, and you can see it really easily. And that is basically everything that I did here. So I included as well a bone ring for my summoner. What was the name? A bone helmet, as we have seen. I also, this is basically just the white bases. So I will come and explain the Marraketh bows and like the Crucible items later, because with the Crucible items you do not care about the rarity, so it doesn't matter if they're white, magic, or yellow, or rare in this case. You just want the general item in order to check the Crucible tree. And in this case, chancing bases is only referred to as white items. So this is why I only put the white items in here that I would basically Alk Slam, or maybe put a fossil on them. Alright, then in terms of currency, I can only suggest to also change some of the sounds on these currencies. If you are like me and you like to listen to music while playing, some of these sounds can be a bit underwhelming. For example, if I find the Chaos Orb, it is really rare. It's a very important drop in Ruthless, in my opinion. So this sound, I don't know, in my head it is maybe just like whetstone dropping, or maybe an armory crafting or quality crafting material. So it's a bit underwhelming. So again, here you can obviously choose whatever you like, but I went for a bit more offensive, or like a bit more noticeable sound. For example, this one is quite noticeable, but you can also go for this one again. So it really depends. I mean, it is kind of a thing if you played standard mode for many years. This one, this is basically like an alchemy, and this one is a really heavy, like a really good unique. So you might be triggered a bit in your head, but I rather be triggered than missing a Chaos Orb, or even missing an Alchemy Orb in Ruthless would be a real bummer. So I went and changed the sound on all these currencies. They do not drop that often anyways. Also like tainted currencies, and even, to be honest, even chromatics. I mean, you can also put the volume down a bit on these. But I think, in my opinion, it's kind of worth it. I didn't touch the armory scraps because they drop quite often. But things like chromatics and jewelers, you might find one per map, and that might even be much, because there's days where I have found maybe 3 jeweler orbs and maybe 5 chromatics. So they are quite rare. And yeah, I would just put a bit of an emphasis on these drops. But that is obviously personal taste. So the same thing kind of goes for uniques. So when we check the unique section here, you will hear this famous sound from standard mode, the number 6 sound here, when something really valuable drops. And I basically went through, because this is like the normal unique sound, and I changed all these to the normal unique sound, except for the very, very top tier items here. because in my head this is just the sound when a unique drops, and in Ruthless any unique can be good. Like even shitty uniques can be really good for leveling an alternative character, for example. So I changed all of these to the unique sound that I represent in my head, basically. Divination cards doesn't matter, they do not exist in Ruthless. Maps I just left as they are. I think that's quite perfect. All the crafting or like endgame stuff I left as it is. Also these endgame rares I left as they were. Also the campaign stuff I think is done really well. You could arguably mess around with flasks a bit, because sometimes flasks are still being highlighted in the endgame, which doesn't really make sense for me, because I do have quite a big selection of flasks. And for that I can suggest you, once you made some changes, you can click onto the simulate button here and you can just generate loot. You can select the area that you are currently playing in. You can also select to play the different sounds that you have set up. And then you can just click here and loot will be generated. So you can create general loot, which is probably the most fitting term for Ruthless, because you might find a lot of trash. Or you could generate valuable loot, but then you might hear just a lot of things happening at once, so I rather just generate normal loot. And then you can check if the sounds that you hear and the things that you see on screen correspond to the changes that you have made in the customize section. So that is a very useful tool, and sometimes in game you notice that something is not working. Then I come back to this section here, and for example, if I see, okay, the bone helmet here is not highlighted in the way that I have set it up, then I can just go here, click on the bone helmet, and it will show me the setup and why it is showing it like that. Then I can click find in customizer. And then it shows me, okay, this is basically a high-end crafting basis, and then I could make changes here. So I could change the things that we just did. I could change basically the sound. I could go here, click onto the color of the icon and the form of the icon on the mini map, and I can also change the beam. So I could say, okay, I want a green beam here, for example, and obviously the size again. So I can just customize that, and then basically come back to the section and try again and see if it works now. For example, this is another thing that I made. The unset rings I kind of wanted to highlight a bit. So you could either do it in here, but I chose, and oops, misclick. I chose to go to the very bottom section of the filter page, and I added additional show and hide rules. So this is obviously a bit more advanced. So if you have never used FilterBlade before, I would suggest maybe to just be a bit more careful here, because you can mess up the filter quite easily. Because if you overwrite stuff, and it also says here in this section, this little disclaimer, you can basically change stuff so you wouldn't even see it. I mean, this is not so correct for the Ruthless mode, because you cannot hide items, but you could still mess up some of the rules that are in this section, or in the whole filter in general. But let's just do it together the way I did it. I made some changes to the base type based rules. So you go onto here, and at the moment there is nothing in here. And then I, for example, put in the Maracaf bow that I wanted to see. I put in the Shadow Scepter that I want to see. And this corresponds for each Maracaf bow and each Shadow Scepter. Doesn't matter if it's white, if it's magic, if it's rare, even uniques basically. I mean, they will be overwritten by the unique section, but for all kinds of scepters and Maracaf bows, I want to see all of them, because I want to unveil the Crucible tree. And what I can suggest then, maybe highlight it slightly, give it a bit flashy text, and maybe maybe not that, but you can also give it a sound. So I went normal sound, I went for this one, I think. Bong. It gives you just a nice tone that would not disturb you. I think it's quite pleasant in my ears. I also enabled a beam and a icon, so I will definitely not miss them. And I made the beam and the icon blue, so I always know, okay, a crafting item or basically a Crucible base type just dropped. And then I also clicked a normal, magic, and rare, because I want to see all of them. I mean, rares are shown anyways, so this is not so important, but in my case I also selected it. I said, okay, any sockets, that's already good. An item level, I would choose any, because there might be items dropping in like sections before maps even that could be still relevant, especially Shadow Scepters themselves are item bases that are low level, so even before level 68 you might even find more Shadow Scepters than in maps. And so this section here with the item level can be important. I would, if you want to go sure or make sure that you are setting it up correctly, I would just set it to any. So yeah, and that is basically the changes that I made. Obviously you can add more things, so you could also add unset rings here, which can be quite good for crafting if you are starved for sockets, for example on a summoner. So yeah, but this is the main part of the, let's say, advanced filter techniques that I have used. I mean, it's not advanced at all if you have been playing the game for a few years, but it can be useful for, let's say, if you're new to Ruthless and if you're new to setting up your own item filters in general. And then obviously again you can go to the simulate section, and as you have seen, the unset ring, which used to be white and a bit smaller, now shows correctly with the red border, with the yellow text, and also the blue icon that you can then see on the minimap, so you will not miss those items anymore. And then you can continue testing. You just heard the unique sound that we have set up with the Azimite dagger here. So yeah, that is basically everything that I did. And once you are done, you can just go to save and export. Then you can enter the name, so my Ruthless Solar Self Found filter, and I usually put the date as well, because if you have a few different filters, you might change like the items that you want to highlight. For example, if you find one of the items, then obviously you need to change the filter and take the item out, the base out. Then I also can recommend to put the date in the name of the filter. You can then choose if you want to auto load the filter. I do not recommend, but you can do that however you want. And then you can either sync it with your Path of Exile account, or you can just download it. I'm still a person who just likes to save and download here, so I just click that, and then you will have it as a file in on your computer, and then you can go into the menu. So just escape, game, and then you will have the section under game. You will have a Ruthless item filter, and then you can just select it here. And as you can see, I have a few different versions that I have made over the past few weeks. And maybe one more thing that is important to note: you can also open the folder where the stuff is basically sitting on your hard drive. The normal filters for softcore won't work in Ruthless mode. So Ruthless has a specific item filter, and the ending is not .filter but .ruthless filter. Maybe just a thing to keep in mind: if you cannot find your filter in here, you might have chosen the wrong filter type altogether. So you might have chosen a normal standard filter and not a Ruthless filter. That is just important to keep in mind if you suddenly cannot find the filter in the game menu. Okay, so yeah, that was just a rough guide on how to set up a FilterBlade Ruthless item filter. I hope you understood everything. I think there is no video for Ruthless Solar Self Found that explains this, so yeah, I thought I would just make a small video about the subject, because I received a few questions about it. And if you have any additions or also critique, or maybe you want to show your own filter ideas and methods, then I'm very happy to hear those, and just feel free to comment under this video. And I hope the filtering works for you and you never miss any of your required items again. Alright, thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.